Hi, I'm Jen Kobrick, a holistic family consultant with the Consciously Parenting Project. And today I want to talk to you about the spectrum of competence. So, if you've ever had the experience of learning something new about parenting or anything else in life, and when you go to try to do that thing, you don't, then this video is for you. Because I've been to that frustrating place so many times. And I've found that understanding this framework of the spectrum of competence makes it a lot easier to have compassion for myself and also to have compassion for my kids, because you can't learn any skill without moving through the stages of the spectrum of competence. So our kids are doing this constantly, and especially when they're really little. So let's use an example of, let's say that you have decided that you're going to allow your child to cry and be present for that instead of telling them, go to your room or stop crying. So let's say that you understand this concept, you've learned about it, you've come to an understanding of why you want to make this change in your family and you want to allow your child the space to cry. And yet, one morning, the eggs are not right, not the way your child wants them, and they fall on the floor and start crying. And you hear the words come out of your mouth, "They're just eggs, stop crying." And all of a sudden you realize, that's not what I was going to do. That's not what I was going to say. And it's really, really easy to get down on ourselves and get really hard on ourselves when those things happen. When we stick our foot in where we swore that we were going to stop sticking our foot. So let's talk about this. All right, let's talk about the stages of the spectrum of competence. So the spectrum of competence goes from unconscious incompetence, which are the things that you don't know. So that would be, you have no idea that it matters if your child is allowed to cry or told to stop those feelings. Then the next stage is conscious incompetence, which is where I was in that example that we just talked about, of knowing what you want to do, and that's not how it happens. And then the next stage is conscious competence, which is where you do the thing, but it's hard and you have to work at it. So that's where you might say, they're just eggs, but I'll sit here with you while you cry, as an example. So doing the thing, but it's really hard to do it. It doesn't feel natural. It feels weird and scripted and artificial. And then the last stage is unconscious competence, which is where you don't know what you know. So this is where, maybe it's been a year or two since that example, and there's been so much practice at trying and failing and trying and doing it, but sort of awkwardly, to where now it feels natural. And to now, the eggs are wrong and your kid starts crying, you're just like, oh, it seems like that's really hard right now. And then later you maybe realize, oh yeah, like a year ago, if that happened, I would have been a total mess. And my kid would have been so much further off the rails because of my reaction. So that's the spectrum of competence. And I want to say it sucks to be in conscious incompetence. Out of the entire spectrum, that is the hardest place to be by far. Because nothing is worse than knowing what you want to do and yet not doing it. And then we can add to that our society has this idea that if you don't do something perfectly, immediately, the first time, and every time, that's a failure, that you are a failure. And so I'm here to tell you that that's not true, because it's not possible to do something, especially something hard, like parenting consciously, perfectly and exactly the way you want the first time, or every time, or even after you've been doing it for years, to be every time. because we're human and because we have a lot of layers. And if you had been able to do it perfectly in the first place, you would already have been doing it. There would be nothing to change. And we all have things like that. We all have things that we just naturally do the way we want to and automatically, and we don't have to think about it. And we also all have things that we're trying to do better at. And when we're trying to do better at things, we have to go through these 4 stages. There is no other way. And it's not just parenting or these big things that have all of these emotional layers to work through to be able to move from conscious incompetence to conscious competence. But this applies to everything. And I have a 4-year-old right now who's sort of on the cusp of learning to read. And I can really clearly see these stages in his process of learning to read. So I, as a literate adult, am in the unconscious competence end of things when it comes to reading, right? I can pick anything up and just read it. And I don't even think about that I'm doing it, right? I can do it as easily as I breathe. And when my 4-year-old was a baby, he was on the unconscious incompetence, right? He had no idea what reading was, didn't care, no desire to do it. And now, for the past year, he's been very slowly moving between the conscious incompetence and the conscious competence. So he started out, understanding, making this connection that when we read him books, there's words there and they mean something and we can figure it out and he can't. And then he started to be curious about how we figure that out and started to slowly connect letters with sounds. But he still couldn't put those sounds together to read words on a page. And he would get really frustrated when he would be looking at something and he would know that there's a thing that can be done with these words on this page, and he couldn't do it. And very slowly, it started to be more of the time, especially if the word is short and if there's context, like pictures or a sentence or a story that he's read before, so he kind of knows what words are coming, where he can sound those words out and make sense of them. But it's hard and it's slow and it's painstaking. And it'll probably be several more years before he's moved fully into competence and is starting to become unconscious about his level of competence. So I want to name that our kids are doing this. My daughter went through this recently with learning to walk. Is the same way. Our kids do this with learning to ride a bike, learning to write, learning to speak. Kids, especially really young kids, are just constantly going through cycles of finding new skills they don't know how to do and moving through these stages. So I found that learning this framework and understanding these stages and having those words has really helped me to have more compassion for where my kids are on this. And especially when they're frustrated and I'm like, yeah, of course you don't know how to read fluently. You're 4. But that's not how he sees it. He sees it as I'm trying to do this thing and it's not working. And so how he feels is exactly the same way that I felt yelling at him about crying over the eggs. So it's also helped to give me a lot of compassion about myself, to understand that I will get there. I will move along these stages of competence, but that there's no skipping it. There's no jumping from unconscious incompetence to conscious competence. There's no skipping that yucky, I want to do it and I just can't, and I tried to do it and I failed. There's no skipping that yuckiness. And I actually think it's really important that we can't skip that. And so that's the last part of this that I want to talk about, because whatever is there inside ourselves, that's the barrier between what we want to do and what we're capable of doing, that gap is where we can heal things, really deep, important things, because that gap is where our programming, where our stories, where our experiences previously in our lives, where the parenting that was done to us as children, where, social conditioning, all of those things live in that space between what we're trying to do, and what we're actually doing. So there's no getting through that space without processing and integrating those things that live in that space. And to do that, we need support. We need connection with other people. We need connection with people who can hold that space and see where we are and have compassion for where we are in our journey without judgment, without telling us what to do, without trying to fix it, and especially without telling us that we're not good enough or that we're a failure. Because when we can have that space, that safe container to experience that yucky unconscious incompetence place, when we can experience that place in a compassionate, safe container, then the things that come up, there's room for us to look at them. There's room for us to look at the thoughts, the feelings, the body sensations that come up in that space and start to make sense of them, start to integrate them. And in that conscious light, when we can really look at them, is where we can decide how we want those things to be a part of our lives going forward. And as we integrate a layer and process a layer of that stuff, then we can move a little bit further towards competence. And then more stuff's going to come up, and we're going to process through and heal the next layer of stuff. And then we can move a little bit further. And this can be very quick or very slow, depending on how much stuff there is. And the last thing that I want to say is that how much of the time we can be in competence. Let's say that we worked through some of that stuff and gotten to a point where most of the time we're doing the thing we want to do. And maybe even a lot of the time we're not even thinking about it anymore. That's become natural, which is where I would say I am now about something like allowing my child to cry when they're feeling big feelings. But yet still, there are times where I'm like, just shut up. And that is because I'm still human and I still have layers to process because this work is never completely finished. But the reason that sometimes it feels like, oh, I can do this. I've got this. I understand this and I'm doing it. And other times it's like, where did that come from? Why did I just lose it over that? Is because we move back and forth along this spectrum depending on how we're doing. So if I've had enough sleep and I've been doing yoga regularly and I've, had some time to myself and I've, been to a healing story circle recently, then I got this. I can listen to feelings all day long. And if my toddler was teething last night and I only slept for 3 hours and I haven't had coffee yet this morning and, and I'm haven't had a moment to myself in a week, then I'm probably going to have a lot less space for feelings about eggs than I might on a good day. And that's okay too, because we're all, where we are on this spectrum is going to change depending on how much our own needs have been met and where we are ourselves. And over time, that can become a barometer as well of what our own needs are. I know that if I'm having a hard time dealing with feelings about eggs, that it means it's time for me to reach out and have some connection and have some space to deal with whatever I'm dealing with other adults. Which brings me to that there is support out here for you if you're feeling like you're having a hard time getting from where you are now to where you want to be, if you're having a hard time implementing that, or if there's stuff that's coming up, or if it's just really hard right now because we're living through a really hard time right now. So if you feel like you could use some connection and some space to be able to be heard and seen and felt and accepted, then I want to invite you to join a healing story circle. We have at least one a week, and most weeks several, that are completely free right now. And those can be accessed through the Consciously Parenting /COVID-19 page, which I will link in the notes. And then we also have a free Facebook group, which is called the Consciously Parenting Community Group. And I'm leading a book club in there every week right now, and that's also a great place to connect in between healing story circles. And there's also some other resources available, including one-on-one support if you really need, somebody to really be your support, your lifeline right now, available on that page. So if you have enjoyed this video, please like it. If you have thoughts about what I've been saying, please comment. Please share the video if you know anyone who could use a little bit of validation that sometimes it's really, really hard to parent the way we're trying to. And subscribe if you want to know when I post more videos. All right, have a great day, and I'll see you soon.